It's a pleasure to be back up here, and particularly a pleasure to be here with you, Bill, who's been a good friend for quite a long time. And I think really interesting that you're able to come here from what is a traditional industry, manufacturing industry in the heartland, to the crowd that's really the Silicon Valley digital tech changing world, and I think have some important things to say from what you've learned. You've been a visionary, and I know this, personally in knowing you and watching you. Bill was one of the first really outspoken environmentalists in Detroit when that was considered either undermining of the entire industry, foolish or stupid or worse, for a very long time. You're a visionary now for new transportation that's beyond the auto, even though you're, executive chairman at Ford. And so the first question I have is, really has to do with leadership, because we're looking at next generation leadership. How do you keep true to your vision when the world around you for a lot of years is criticizing or undermining you?
Well, first of all, thank you all for having me, and I'm very humbled to be here and to be with people like you, Jack. And in fact, having Jack interview me about wisdom is sort of like having Serena Williams ask a third grader to be her doubles partner. I mean, it's but in any case.
Okay.
This is the kind of conversation that Jack and I actually have privately as well, because he is a very good friend and really in many ways my mentor. I read his book, A Path with Heart, which was published in 1993, and it literally changed my life, because I had really been struggling with how someone in an old line industrial company that was polluting the environment and really doing the minimum to comply with laws on the environment, how could I retain my humanity and my sense of belief while still working there? And so I read Jack's book, and it really, it resonated with me to the point where there was a little blurb on the back that said the author lives in Woodacre, California. So I got information and called Jack and said, "You don't know me, but I'd love to meet you." And so I came out to California shortly thereafter, and it really is what began a long friendship. But more importantly, I think even than a friendship, was the way Jack has been able to guide me through these real dilemmas, which I think all of us in business do face, because when you're in business, it's very hard to be a purist. There are dilemmas that face you every day, and some are particularly vexing. But and to me, the easy answer was always to leave. That would have always been the default. I could have gone and formed my own NGO, which was environmentally, focused, and I did think about that. But ultimately, I really believed, and when I look back, I was very young, and I probably naively at the time, that if I stuck the course, I could really help change the trajectory of our business, certainly at Ford, and ultimately, hopefully, our industry and all of industry. What I didn't understand was how long that would take. Thankfully, it's happening, but boy, has it been a long journey.
So how did you not lose hope with all the criticism? And people would say, you talk about mileage or you talk about the environment, and people would, say, this man is undermining our industry. Get him out of here. How did you stay true to yourself?
Well, it was interesting.
As a leader.
At Ford, I was immediately told when I joined the company to stop associating with any known or suspected environmentalists, and I was considered a Bolshevik in the company, but that was fine. So it did, though, wear one down after a while, because what was interesting was there was a period of time, not only were those views not welcome within our industry, frankly, the NGOs weren't so happy either, because they really thought that maybe I was a wolf in sheep's clothing. And there was actually an ad that was run in the New York Times with me as Pinocchio by one advocacy group, which, and I thought, well, this is great. I'm getting shot by my friends and shot by, the enemies, and that didn't leave a whole lot of people in between. But I really did believe always that it was the right path, and that that ultimately, a lot of things drove me to this, but not the least of which was the realization that if we didn't get on the right side of this, we would end up like the tobacco industry, where we wouldn't be able to attract the best and the brightest to come work for us, that our employees would have to apologize to their family and their friends for working there. And I never wanted that to happen to us, because I care deeply about the company. It is a family company, and not just my family. I mean, one of the things that I feel is so special about our company is we have a lot of fourth, fifth, and even sixth generation people working at the company, and so I didn't want that to happen to that legacy.
Well, you talk about it as a family company. You just went through, and the auto industry just went through the worst crisis since Henry Ford, your great-grandfather, started the company. You could have, as you said, you could have lost the company and industry on your watch.
Yeah.
And it came close in certain ways.
Yeah, very much so.
You had, in order to sustain that, you had to make decisions which included laying off probably tens of thousands of people from a family company. How did you do that?
A lot of phone calls to you. That's how I did it. No, it was. And I only say that half in jest. I'm sure I drove Jack crazy, but really that was something that was very much on my mind. I would lay awake every night, just staring at the ceiling, saying, after 100 years, is this all going to fall apart on my watch? Am I going to be the family member who ultimately presides over the destruction of the company, and all that meant, and all the people and all the families that depended on that, and and so, without getting too melodramatic, it really was the practice that you got me going on years before, and the notion of compassion and compassion for the greater good was something that. And also every day setting intention. And that's something as part of practice that really was very helpful to me during this period, where I was about to say, well, I would awake, but frankly I never slept. I would get up in the morning and I would set the intention for the day to whatever faced me, I would do it with compassion and a sense of loving kindness. And so, and often it was a very difficult day because, as you point out, during that era we did have to let people go. And these aren't just, quote, employees. I mean, I know them. I know their families. Their children went to school with my children and played in the little leagues with my kids, and I'd see them out. And so, and what was really heart-wrenching was I would start to get emails and letters from them as they were leaving saying, thank you so much for the opportunity to work for this great company. And, I mean, you talk about bursting into tears. I would have almost been happier if they'd written me, screw you letters, because at least I could have understood that. But they were so wonderful, the people and the families throughout this, that it really broke my heart and made me very determined to get this company back for them. And thankfully, that did happen.
So have you hired them back?
Yes. And so we had a very emotional moment this year because part of this, we didn't go bankrupt and our competitors did. But in order to do that, before the credit markets froze, I went to we hocked everything, including our family name. I had to hock the blue oval, which you can imagine that family meeting going to explain to my relatives that we just had put everything in hock, including our name. So, but what was very cool was this year, because we've paid our debt largely back now, we got the blue oval back, and it was fun. I got on the intercom at our headquarters, and I think it only had ever been used for a fire alarm, frankly. I don't think anyone had ever been on it. And I announced that we got the Blue Oval back, and people were cheering in the hallway. It was very neat. It was a very neat moment.
So we're talking about leadership. I mean, this is leadership of a company with hundreds of employees and plants all over and so forth. But it's also a question for all of us, as in the tech world or whatever. How do we lead? And here it's how do you lead setting your intention in the time of crisis? You've had other crises. When you first became the CEO, wasn't there a big explosion at the Rouge River plant and all that pretty early on? And what did you do?
Yeah, that was probably the worst day of my life, frankly. It was, I had just taken over, and I looked out the window, and I saw this smoke coming up from, which was our Rouge plant. And so I grabbed my coat and started to head out. And I said I asked a few people if they knew what was going on, and they said no. And so one of the guys who worked for me grabbed me and said, you can't go there. And I said, well, why not? And they said, well, you don't know what's going on, and generals don't go to the front. And I said, well, then bust me to private, because I'm out of here. And so I took off, and there had been an explosion, and there had been people killed and a number injured. And so I literally spent the next weeks and months going to hospital rooms, homes, and ultimately funerals. And it was awful. But kind of through that, though, there was a sense of community in the worst possible circumstances that were created, and bonds with the families that I keep today, all these years later. And so, and it struck me then that compassion, I mean, it's great to sit and practice and meditate on compassion, but it's something else to act on it. And I think that's, again, one of the things that I've always admired about you, Jack, is that you've been an activist for compassion your entire life. And you don't just write books, and you don't just lead retreats. You actually, change people's lives. And to me, that really was in my head at that moment was, okay, if I truly want to be compassionate, and I did, what do I do? Of course, there's no blueprint. I didn't know what to do. I took out my credit card and I gave it to all the families, and I said, whatever you need, just go do it. And then as the days went on, things, became clear what needed to happen, and for the families and sometimes for the employees themselves. It's interesting, though, all of you in business will understand this. The lawyers had a fit. They first didn't want me to go to the site, but then they also didn't want me involved post-incident because, they thought that it would expose us and me to some sort of, potential lawsuits. And I frankly couldn't have cared less because I thought, that's what's wrong with, so many of our institutions, not just corporations. But,
So one way to awaken compassion, and it was talked about earlier today, maybe it was Ariana, is in crisis, and you realize there's this great outpouring of empathy that comes when you see someone in crisis. But you're also trying to create, in some way, a company that doesn't just wait for the crisis, that has at least some sense of fostering well-being or mindfulness or compassion in an ongoing basis. And I know you have different kinds of trainings and so forth. So what are you doing both at the company and maybe also for yourself in ways that keep,
well, one of the things that you've always taught me is that, compassion has to start with yourself. Because if you're not compassionate towards yourself, it's very hard to sustain that towards others because you'll burn out. And that was actually a very hard lesson for me because I thought that felt very selfish at the start. Well, why should I worry about myself? I'm fine, and I've got lots of great things going for me in the world. So why should I waste 1 second thinking about myself? But but with your urging, it really does have to start with oneself, and that is something that I do for myself. Is that in practice, when I do usually start with myself, whether it's loving kindness meditation or or any other type, and then I'll kind of spread it out once I think I've covered the bases. But I also think that within a company, I mean, there are a lot of disadvantages to being an old line company, but one of the advantages are you do have a corporate culture. And one of the things that I knew about our employees was our employees, for instance, if there was a sign up to go to Children's Hospital, there'd be 10 spaces on the list, and you'd see people squeezing in like 21 names because everybody wanted to go do it. And that was true whether it was to clean up the river, or, I mean, it didn't matter what it was. So one of the things that I did, which I'm most happy about, was I started something called the Volunteer Corps. This is about 10 years ago, which allowed our employees on company time to go volunteer really all around the world, anything from tsunami relief to something in their local neighborhood, on company time, and we helped them with resources to help make a difference, because I wanted to institutionalize this spirit that was already there of compassion. So, I mean, and that was really not a big deal. It was I mean, of course, HR told me all the reasons why it was a bad idea, but the spirit of it was already there in the company, and all I had to do was just sort of institutionalize it.
What made the spirit there? Because it's not there in every company.
Well, it's funny. I don't know. I don't know, and I guess it's the only company I've ever been in. So that's really nothing to compare it to. But I think it is largely one of the things that I hear from people that come from other companies to join us is they say it does feel like a family company, and and in today's day and age that really sounds like an anachronism, and it sounds almost irrelevant. And in many ways it probably is, but a lot of the values and the sense of community that creates, I think, are not irrelevant and are not anachronistic. So I really believe that way preceded me, that sense of community and that sense of belonging. And all I've tried to do is sort of kind of help that along wherever I can, and maybe try and redefine it a little bit for the times we're in.
You said when we were preparing for this that people work their whole lives for Ford, or there would be 3 or 4 or 5 generations. And here you're on the board of eBay, for example, and Silicon Valley things, and people work somewhere for a couple of years, and then they'll move from eBay to Facebook and move from there to Twitter or Zing or whatever and back. So there isn't that family sense. How can people then carry those values when they're not part of that kind of family?
It's funny, Jack, before I came to this conference, I actually had the exact same question, because I thought for all the drawbacks of being a 100-and-some-year-old company with a lot of things that, even today still need updating from a culture standpoint, one of the things that I thought was an advantage for, a company like ours, was the fact that we had this culture of caring and community, and I didn't know how the newer companies, but a couple of things have happened. First of all, being here for the last 2 days, it's been awesome to see the members of startup companies, up here speaking and in the audience. I mean, this is how you do it. I mean, it's great, and I think this whole conference and the idea behind it is brilliant, because I think you can really jumpstart this whole effort that in our company took many, many years to evolve. I think, like so many things that happen in Silicon Valley, this is something that can short circuit, in some ways, disruptive wisdom, if you will. But the other thing, though, that's interesting is you mentioned eBay. I am on the board of eBay, and eBay has just rolling out an effort called Shared Values, and it's actually very well done, and it's company wide. And eBay is no longer a startup, and certainly by Silicon Valley, time, it's sort of almost a middle-aged company. But they are now, I think, really understanding the importance of having enduring corporate culture, and something that they can all believe in. Because at the end of the day, if all you're working for are stock options and a paycheck, and a lot of speakers have said this today, that's not enough. And for many years in Silicon Valley, it was enough, at least in the very short term. There were There were big payoffs. There were a lot of money to be made. There were a lot of bragging rights to be had. But, I think people are now finding that that's not enduring. And so I'm very excited to see this conference take place and see the kind of speakers that have preceded us to talk about this.
So let's talk about business for a moment, because business is driven by bottom line. Whether it's big corporations or startups, people are still looking for their funders and then how to, create a business plan that's successful. And in a big company like yours, there's a lot of metrics, but there's the online metrics too. You're watching to see who's clicking on your site and all of that. And those they can easily take over as the decision-making points. What is it going to do to our metrics? What's it going to do to our bottom line? How do you apply mindfulness or wisdom within a business culture?
That was one of the very first questions that I asked you all those years ago was, see, I remember what he told me. He doesn't remember his answers, but I remember them. But
it's great.
You did. I asked you that. I said, how can one have humanity in a place that's all driven by metrics? And I worked for bosses that I thought that's all they were metrics, literally, because all they talked about is all they cared about. And I thought, boy, if that's my future, forget it. And I'll never forget, some of the CEOs, and it's not just CEOs, some of the higher-ranking executives that I saw over my lifetime. I was very lucky to have grown up with the Ford Motor Company, and so I saw all the top people from the time literally I was born, not just from when I joined the company. And I saw so many of them lose their humanity along the way. It really was terrifying to me. And I'll never forget my very first meeting I was in. We were in the middle of a subject with a senior executive, and I had just joined the company, and the meeting ended, and sort of in mid-sentence, and I said to somebody, what just happened? And they said, oh, he finished his cigar. When he finishes the cigar, the meeting ends. I thought, you've got to be kidding me. And then we had a CEO who thought it was a sign of weakness if you went to the bathroom. And so if you were an executive, you had to sit in 8-hour meetings, and I thought, this is just sheer madness. We had another one who said to me later on, you think you'd like to be CEO? Let me show you my calendar. And he laid it out and he said, if you want to have lunch with me, it would have to be 3 years out. I don't have a single lunch or dinner or breakfast free between now and then. And and that's when I started calling you frantically saying, well, I think at the end of the day, metrics are always important in a business, and they have to be, because you have to be able to measure success. But I also think you can model humanity in a way that people can pick up on. I mean, I think that the nature in corporations are that, people will mimic what they see above them in terms of the hierarchy. And whether that's a good or bad thing, it's a reality. And I've come to realize that over the years. And so, when I choose, the next generation of leaders, to me, behaviors is, certainly equally important and never less important than skill and ability, because I've seen a lot of really skilled, metric-driven executives make just and Ariana talked about that this morning. Some of the brightest people in the world make some of the worst decisions, and I think it's because they've completely lost touch or shut out humanity. And I'd like to just say one more thing on this. To me, and one of the things I saw early on in my life, one of the saddest things I've ever seen is an ex-CEO. And it's because, nobody's running around telling them how great they are anymore. The company plane's grounded. The adulation has stopped, and they don't have any other sense of identity. And it really, it's the rare, and fortunately, I do know some on the flip side as well that are, wonderful people. But that really struck a chord with me long before I had really thought through the implications. I remember as a young child seeing that and thinking, this is really pretty sad.
So there's a way in which the situation of, still talking about leadership, that power corrupts or it influences you in a certain way that you lose your humanity or you get caught up and inflated in yourself. What are the safeguards for that? Well,
I think for me, it's one of the things I've always valued is honest feedback, and one of the things that I'm so happy about is I have friends all through the company. I started working on the assembly line. I changed my name and went to work on the line out of college, and I made some very good friends who didn't know my last name was Ford until later, and by then they'd already given me an earful about everything that was wrong with the company, and which I very much value, and I always sought those people out all through my career. People that that I thought would give me honest feedback and tell me, Bill, you really screwed up on this one, or that was a dumb decision, and because that is so valuable. Otherwise, you really start to make big mistakes if you're not getting honest feedback. And the other thing is the practices of mindfulness itself. One of the things that kept me going during the darkest era, 5-6 years ago, when it really felt like we might lose absolutely everything. I'd lay in bed thinking, this is, what would it be like to lose everything? What would it really be like to lose absolutely everything, including a large part of my own identity? But I realized through practice, it really wasn't my identity. It was a lot of trappings, and it's stuff I care deeply about, and people I care deeply about. But I realized through practice that the core of me would be just fine. And that the people that I loved and cared about would still love and care about me. And that sounds fairly trite, but I also know that had I not been practicing, for a little bit of time, I think I would have understood that intellectually. I know I wouldn't have felt it right here. And so, to me, that was, the best, grounding that I could have had during an extremely difficult period, because I realized that losing everything really didn't mean losing everything.
So I'm listening to you and also listening with an ear to the next generation or two in Silicon Valley and thinking you're already speaking to what wise leadership might be or what kind of practices you might have to undertake so that you don't lose yourself, basically, that you have some sense of your own values and integrity when the world is either saying environmentalism is bad or whatever you were getting attacked for. What other things would you say to these new global information people that you've learned as you kind of look ahead toward the future?
Well, I don't think I have much wisdom at all to impart. I think they're way ahead of me in almost every possible way. But I do think that, ultimately they should never forget that any business is always about the people. It's not about the technology. It's not about the numbers. It's not about the connectedness or lack thereof. It's always about people, and every business is about human interactions. And so, Soren asked, Ariana, when she's on her deathbed, what will she remember? And of course, she had a great answer saying, I'll be looking forward. But, I've thought about that, and to me, I know it'll be the people that I've loved and worked with and have been in my life. And so, and when I think of my times at Ford, as much as I love some of the cars we've come out with and some of the trucks and some of the awards, all the stuff that goes with it, it's always the people that I remember and my times with them. Good times and frankly even the bad times. Some of the interactions have been horrible and I remember those too. So I think that's maybe one piece of advice that I would pass along, that the technology is awesome and it's going to take us places that we've never dreamt before, certainly that I've never dreamt of before. But at the end of the day, it always comes back to people.
Just as an aside, there are some Ford cars that I really love over the generation. So, yes,
I thought you levitated. I didn't realize
there's some really cool cars. So again, talking now, shifting from leadership in that way, but still in the visionary place. You're now doing another level of envisioning in the future, and you're getting yourself in trouble in a new interesting way, which is not new for you, but it's a new creative kind of trouble. And that is that, in a sense, you're envisioning, here's the big world automaker that you represent. You're saying, well, automobiles are going to be the problem in a certain way, and we have to think beyond the automobile, which must drive your board and, executives crazy. But do you want to talk about that vision and why you're willing to articulate that, or
sure.
what seems
and
important?
I am sort of like the crazy aunt they let out of the closet every now and then. But no, to me, there are, if I look back at the history of our company, for most of that history, it was a great thing. I mean, the company, prior to the Model T, this is amazing. The average person never traveled more than 25 miles from home in their entire lifetime prior to the Model T. And all of a sudden, the automobile really determined where people lived, where they played, and where they worked. And it opened up, the world to people. And that was a great thing. And then came ambulances and fire trucks and work trucks and, all the things that society counts on, and that was a great thing. And then, war is obviously a horrible thing, but, we became the arsenal of democracy during World War II and helped win World War II. And, I guess that was a great thing. I mean, it certainly was something that, was needed in this country at that time. But then, when I left college, I started to realize that it wasn't all great anymore. And that there were, at the time, it was pollution that was starting to really be an issue, and that our industry didn't want to admit or talk about. But that, troubled me deeply because, I was very proud of the Ford Motor Company. But I also wanted to be proud of it going forward, not just retrospectively. And I wanted all the new employees that we were hiring to be proud of it. And so I thought that unless we address this issue, we weren't going to build on this great legacy of our past. So I believe that in my lifetime, we will largely solve that issue now. I believe that I think we'll end our dependence on fossil fuels. And, and it didn't happen. It didn't happen quickly enough, but it's happening. And what's really cool now is you don't hear anybody in our industry really much arguing against that. There are some who may drag their heels a little bit, but frankly, not just in our company, but thankfully the whole industry, that mindset has shifted. But even as we're solving that one problem, there's this other one looming, which I spoke at the TED conference a little while ago. I termed it coin global gridlock because any of you, and you all have, traveled, and you don't have to travel very far, but it's hell getting from point A to point B, and it's particularly terrible in the developing world. And if you just do the math, there's 7 billion people on the planet today. We're going to 9.5 billion by mid-century. There are 1 billion cars on the road today worldwide. The futurists think that could grow up to 4 billion. Well, where are they going to go? And where are they going to forget how you're going to power them? Simply, where you're going to go? I mean, we had the 11-day traffic jam in China a couple summers ago, and even if all the cars are clean, a clean traffic jam is still a traffic jam. So, so how are we going to move people? And in my mind, if we don't solve this, it becomes at best a huge inconvenience, but it frankly becomes a human rights issue, because if you can't move food and health care in major urban areas, then we've got big problems. And so I believe, and this is what I love about Silicon Valley, is the technology that's being developed here is really going to be, in many ways, the solution to this. We're going to have every form of transportation, cars, bicycles, buses, taxis, subways, pedestrians, all in a single network, all talking to each other and all optimizing the ability to move around. So you'll be on your smartphone and you'll be in downtown Mumbai, and you want to go to the soccer stadium 30 minutes out of town, and you'll ask, I'm here, I'd like to go here, and then they'll ask you, do you want the cheapest way or the most direct way? And depending upon how you answer, you will be ticketed all the way through, and it may mean 3 or 4 different types of transport to get you to that.
You get a Segway. And
Absolutely. And there, a Segway,
a zip car.
A zip car, yep. And I think that, therefore, that private car ownership, as we know it, particularly in major urban areas, is going to change dramatically. And you're right. Today, in my industry, that sounds like heresy, but I think it's blindingly obvious. And really, again, if I think that the purpose of a corporation is to make people's lives better, and I do believe that, otherwise why exist as a company, then we got to figure this one out. And I think the technology is going to be there to allow us to do it. I mean, there's all kinds of pieces of it already in place. You all know about the Google autonomous car, which will allow a lot of tighter traffic patterns. There's a lot of parking solutions that will allow. Do you realize today 30% of all fuel burned in cities is burned looking for a parking spot? It's incredible. So what if your car could, and this will happen very soon, when you leave home, let's say you live in suburban New York and you're going to see a play, your car knows where you're going. It will identify and reserve you a parking spot, so you just go right to it and it'll be there. And then you'll only pay for the time you use because you'll log on with your cell phone. A lot of these things are already, as you know, in the Bay Area, some of these pilots are already taking place. They're just not all together yet. And I think that's ultimately what has to happen, is cars talking to other cars. So vehicle-to-vehicle communication, where if your car senses a traffic jam, it alerts all the other cars around it. And then my car will say, do you want me to reroute you based on that? Weather patterns will all be distributed.
Can they cook? I mean,
they can. Jack, we introduced a car last year which is connected to the cloud that can actually check your blood sugar. It can do anything.
Your car, your doctor.
I suspect it can cook. But so I guess I think unlike the environmental issue, which took decades and decades to first recognize and then really go after, I think this one, even though it is in some ways a larger issue, because of the speed that technology is being developed, I think will be solved easier. And I'm very hopeful that this is an issue which is real. Now, it's going to require a level of cooperation between urban planners, fuel providers, and then also you think of all the transportation assets in a city. Because in a place, let's say China, where a lot of it's centrally controlled, might be relatively easy. Try New York City, where you have independent taxi. I mean, it's one size won't fit all in every urban area. A lot of these pieces will be transportable, some won't. But I think the cool thing is the technology, unlike the environmental technology, which didn't exist in the early days, a lot of the technology is already being developed. We just have to figure out how to put it all together. It's going to be really fun.
So we have a little bit of time left. It's amazing he's still having fun after 30 years.
I'm more excited. Well, I will say this. I'm more excited today because there has been a shift. It's interesting. I came to this conference thinking, okay, what is an older Midwestern industrial person going to talk to all of you guys about? But then I realized it's pretty similar in many ways. And I'm more excited today about going to work than I was, have ever been in the past, because I think there's more honesty for the most part in corporations. There's more transparency. There's less hierarchy. There's more willingness to listen to good ideas, and there's less resistance to. I mean, for instance, I now refer to Ford as a mobility company, not as a car and truck manufacturer. If I tried that 5 years ago, I do think my board and the top executives would have flipped out. They may still be flipping out, but at least. But there's a recognition within the company. I'm not having to fight this like I had to fight the environmental movement at all. And so, in fact, there's a real sense of energy around it. And it's really fun, too, because it's bringing us into your world. I mean, we just opened a Silicon Valley office. I have my own, I started my own VC aimed at mobility. And so it's really interesting. The world in which a lot of the people here inhabit are starting to now come into our universe and vice versa in a way that never would have happened, 10 years ago. And to me, that's very, very exciting.
So I have a last question for you, and it has to do with the question of justice. You talked about how global gridlock, there you are in these big cities and you can't get food or you can't get medicine, or you're just sitting for 2 days in a traffic jam because everybody bought cars and you can't go anywhere. So there's a vision of mobility and technology. There are the other global problems of water resources declining, of still hunger in a lot of places, educational needs. And I think one of the themes that's critical at this conference, it was there from when Marianne started 2 days ago, is how do we use technology? You're talking about how to better people's lives in a really important dimension, a very important, how do we move? Do you see anything in what you've learned and what you're talking about that translates for these other bigger issues of global justice, stopping war, or feeding people?
Yeah, I mean, I think those issues, as the world continues to shrink and as information is shared, those issues are no longer just the domain of NGOs. They are part of our mission and your mission. Because one of the things that I've discovered over my career is, if you go to a country and you're a big employer in that country, people listen to you. And therefore, you have a platform to address a human rights agenda. I'm very, we didn't talk about it, but I'm very proud of a lot of the initiatives we have in the human rights area at our company, which again would have been sort of almost something that we would have farmed out to maybe our philanthropic arm, 10 years ago, but are now core to our business, and we're driving it through our supply base as well. And that's something that every company here can do as well, is that you can all, embrace this as part of your own mission, and then also ensure that the companies that you do business with embrace it as part of their mission. And that can happen very quickly in a way, again, that I think wouldn't have been possible some years ago.
It's a beautiful vision to stop with. Our time is up.
Oh, thank you, Jack. Thank you.
What a pleasure.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you.
It was really sweet.
Thank you.